We are back now on 12 News with our Democratic candidates for Jefferson County Sheriff. Let's talk about the Jefferson County Jail. There have clearly been issues at some times in the past. 12 News first reported about the female inmate who spat on a deputy. You'll recall, was then punched several times. The deputy in question got 10 days unpaid suspension. There was also a case of a pregnant woman who was tased, 5 months pregnant, tased in jail. Our question tonight, do you believe that the Jefferson County Jail has any systemic issues with excessive force? And we start with Mr. Stevenson with this.
There's no question about it, because the way the officer punched the lady for spitting on him, in the free world, that's assault. And I think anyone that would do that would be charged with assault. Now, this officer received 10 days off. I don't know what the disciplinary review board was thinking about. I don't know what the sheriff's decision was, but I think it was unfair and unfortunate, because that too gives us a black eye and puts a dark cloud over our heads as far as the law enforcement as a whole. Had that been me, after the investigation was completed, I just don't think that officer would be working at the sheriff's department anymore.
Ms. Stevens?
Well, to answer about systematic or systemic corruption, as you called it, I can't weigh in on that. But I can tell you this, that in correctional facilities, there needs to be continuous training. There needs to, I think, an evaluation of the amount of hours that individuals are working. All that is related to how people respond to stressful situations. If there is policy concerning how you treat and how you deal with inmates, those policies need to be enforced. The punishment needs to be consistent and fair throughout the correctional facility.
Mr. Carroll?
As a police officer, I've been spit on before, but the expectation is professionalism. You need to be able to control your behavior and your emotions, and that's the expectation that I have of these officers. Yes, we've had a few isolated incidents out there, and they were dealt with appropriately through the disciplinary review board and the sheriff. But as a sheriff, I will take a strong hold on any kind of abusive issues, especially in the jail or out on the streets. I expect professionalism from my officers. I expect them to follow policy and procedure, and I expect them to be, respectful to others.
Very good, thank you. Stephen Hartman, the Stephen Hartman case, the man who tried to serve a sitting judge with legal papers. He was accused with hindering a proceeding in Jefferson County. There was hidden video of the incident obtained by 12 News. The case resulted in discipline to 2 deputies, one ultimately dismissed for falsehoods in affidavits. Candidates, we ask you, did the county properly handle the Hartman case? If you were sheriff, how would you have handled it? We begin with you, Mr. Carroll.
I believe there was, there was an affidavit that was false. The case was dropped by the DA's office. That officer was disciplined, and it was decided by a disciplinary review board for termination. But that's one of the things you need to make sure is, do you have a policy? What is the culture within your agency? What is it that the officers are doing right? What are they doing wrong? You need to have the policy and procedure that they follow. You need to have the lines drawn. And as a lead peace officer in the organization, as sheriff, I will lead by example. I have the expectation that people do things and they're done right.
Ms. Stevens?
Well, I think it's important to have policies and procedures in place. I think that was a classic example of policies and procedures that were violated, and once it was figured out that it was violated, those individuals were brought before the disciplinary review board. Now, was punishment handed out the same way? Consistently and fairly. That's important. I think it's important for officers to understand what their role is. You cannot get involved in issues that don't concern sheriff's department matters. I think outside entities interfered with the hierarchy of the sheriff's deputies who were working in the courtrooms, and that interfered with their decision making.
Okay, and Mr. Stevenson.
Well, in the courtroom, as you know, as a deputy or the constable, you belong to the judge. Now, I think that, of course, the officers were under the judge's authority, not saying they did everything right. But that entire investigation was not properly done or properly completed, because there was supposed to be some more officers involved in that, the ones who got the search warrant signed by the judge, which shouldn't have happened at that point. So it's unfortunate for the ones who got disciplined, and it's a shame for the ones who did not get disciplined that should have been. So that was just an unfortunate case overall.
Okay, and thank you very much. Let's take a broader look, possibly, about your overall impact on the departments that you have worked within. What is one thing that you would change in the sheriff's department if you were sheriff? And we start with you, Mr. Carroll.
I would change the culture. I believe we need to go to a community-oriented policing model. I think we need to get the officers out of the patrol cars, talking to the citizens, and building relationships. We need to look at what it is our community desires. Do we have relationships with these young adults in the high schools? We need to address these issues through the community policing model. We need to make sure that, people are getting, when they have a question, it's being answered, within a reasonable length of time. That's what I would change, is the culture within the agency.
Okay, Ms. Stevens.
Well, I think it's important for us to get back to the basics. I think we've become a fast food policing agency, and not just our agency, I think across the country, and I think that's part of the problem. I think that we need to reconnect with communities. We need to let kids know who we are. I think, and that's how you build relationships. That's how you build trust. I think the important thing is communication. And communication is two ways. It's not just giving information, but it's also listening. And I think it's so important for kids to understand that we have a job to do, but our job is to protect and to serve them. We're not enemies. And I think across the country, that's how we're viewed now. That's not our role.
Mr. Stevenson.
First thing I would do is bridge the gap within the department. I don't think that department is unified. Like I said, corrections is the largest division of that department, but it's just two different levels of treatment there. They wear the same uniform. I think they should be treated the same. They should be appreciated the same. And there should be a connection with the sheriff and his employees. I feel a department head should know his employees. That alone would motivate them to want to serve better. And that's one thing I would do, and hold people accountable and be accessible and visible myself to the community.
Very good. Thank you to all of you. We have closing statements from our candidates coming up in just a few moments as we move right along tonight. Keep it here on 12 News.